Lassalle. I said excited because I'm excited to share this information with you, right? Keyword being information, as we've seen, Office of the Information Commissioner, CIO, Chief Information Officer, CISO's Chief Information Security Officer. So the power and protection of data. The power of protection of data. What we're going to cover: the power of data, personal information redefined, picking on China. We're going to discuss a little bit of China, the C-suite, failures, empowering the IT department, and also understanding where data goes. The right to privacy, an inalienable human right. The right to privacy is universally considered an inalienable human right. It was established as such by the United Nations in its 1948 Declaration of Human Rights. So about 75 years ago, right? I wonder if those wise writers had any notion of the kind of privacy issue people would be facing 75 years later, right? Could any of them imagine a world where we can announce in a way that is almost globally accessible the most minute details of our daily routines? Did they realize that there would come a time when the there can be data on how long you've watched an advertisement, right? And which advertisements you've watched over others? One of the statements that they said, the original framers: no one shall be subjected to arbitrary or unlawful interference with his privacy, family, home, or correspondence, nor to unlawful attacks on his honor or reputation. Personal information redefined, right? So broad strokes of name, the addresses, national identifications has been known in privacy and compliances, telephone numbers to include details, the sequence of our DNA, biometrics, facial recognition. I worked at an organization where to combat fraud, we did retina scans, but we also did palm vein scanning and facial recognition to make sure that the right person was getting the point of care, right? So all this data, while it serves a purpose, it's still data on subjects that is subject to privacy, right? To all these protections like we're having with the Data Protection Act in Jamaica, as well as with others around the world that we'll get into shortly. And those same, those same 75 years ago, did they know that in 2023, personal data would be one of the most, if not the most valuable commodities on earth, right? It's become kind of cliche now, but you've heard in Gartner or other information sources that they say that data is the new oil, right? So on one hand, we are remarkably cavalier about handing our private information over to just about anyone who asks for it. And on the other, many of us are quite ready to use that personal information of others to improve services, right? Mr. Gray was mentioning when he was mentioning that, and I look at it as an IT professional back in the day, where you're using data for marketing purposes. We used to call that business intelligence, business analytics, and stuff like that, right? You're mining the data that you have to be able to cross-sell and cross-promote. But definitely through the years, it's evolved to the point of having concerns of that data, right? So like we're saying up here, we're ready to give up our personal data until it causes direct harm. The power of data. So I'm going to talk a little bit about China. There's an interesting parallel happening in China as two policies are actively coming into existence, and that's the PIPL and the social credit system, right? Comprehending the power and value of data is easy to discuss, but sometimes it's a little harder to grasp without concrete examples. So that's why I wanted to pick on China just for a little bit. So the PIPL, the Personal Information Protection Law of the People's Republic of China, this provides definitions of the parties, what qualifies as personal information and sensitive information, and the rights of individuals and the obligations of data processors. The social credit system monitors the trustworthiness of individual companies and government entities. And I had trustworthiness in quotations, right? Parties are given a social credit score based on their personal or company data, which is gathered from sources like financial, criminal, and government records, registry offices, and online credit platforms. Businesses can be poorly rated by suppliers, partners, and even customers for tendencies like bad social trustworthiness, right? Bad customer service. The social credit score regulations include local government entities which must pay contractors, provide legitimate data, and ensure their officials behave honorably in performing their duties, their civic duties, right? So these are some of the, we'll come back to that too. With that, you may raise your score by doing things like taking care of your elderly relatives, having a positive influence on your neighborhood, helping the poor, donating blood, praising the government on social media. However, you can lower your score. You can lower it by cheating in online games, offering insincere apologies for crimes, participation in the government's definition of a cult, failing to visit your parents regularly. So anytime I read this one, I'm just compelled to send my mom and dad text messages, because last thing I want, if we get this in the United States, is lowering my credit score. Illegally protesting authorities and traffic offenses. The social credit system encourages the creation of denial lists, which is individuals and entities that are considered untrustworthy, and allow lists, individuals or entities that are considered highly trustworthy. So what ends up happening is this data can be used in malicious ways. It just creates this melting pot of different ways that the data can adversely affect people or give other people an unfair advantage. You know, like we said, if you're having to visit your parents, but you don't know what scenario, et cetera, and that's part of the score, it can really, you know, affect people. Now, are we picking on China? There's other countries out there that have. So at the risk of seeming like I'm singling out China, it's certainly not the only country where personal data can be used in subjective judgments. So we have Australia, Germany, and India. And I'll touch base on one or two for each, right? With Australia, they have special category visas for New Zealanders with a good character test, which is entirely at official discretion and can affect freedom of movement based on antisocial behavior. In Germany, they have a credit score system, sort of like in the United States, we have FICO. With their credit system has a significant impact on individual liberties, and factors like low-income neighbors can affect your score. So I don't know about you guys, I don't know the income of my neighbors personally, but in this instance, it can affect your score, right? So that's something to me that's still mind-boggling when researching this. They also have health insurance providers use fitness data acquired through apps to offer reduced insurance premiums. I worked in an organization before that kind of used to do this to drive down healthcare costs and healthcare insurance premiums through incentivizing. The company was called Incent One, incentivizing people to adopt healthier habits, walking more, getting a mammogram, their diabetes in check, stuff like that. They could in turn use that for gift cards or even cash or discounts on their premiums. In India, this one is interesting, right? Because in India, 99% of the population, right, and they're the number 2, I believe, behind China in terms of most populous country in the world, has Aadhaar identification numbers, which keeps records of their demographic and biometric data. So that's fingerprints and iris scans, which is now creeping into low enforcement programs and is often illegally accessed for commercial purposes. What the C-suite should know about data protection. I started with the rather startling examples of the use of personal data to get us all thinking. We are still catching up with the explosion of technological capabilities. In a Fortune, I think it was in Fortune magazine, February 2022, it was quoted that many prominent CEOs' goals for the year failed to include any intention or dedication to improving their company's data protection and management. And for that, most of these, what I see with a lot of the compliances and regulations that are coming out, they notice this, they know that. So they want board of directors, C-level executives to know about data, to understand data privacy, and understand why it's so critical to follow these, you know, different data protection things, right? So we're talking about, when we discuss data protection, we encounter 4 terms that sound similar. They are not, however. which is data privacy, data protection, data security, data compliance. I'm gonna touch base briefly on each one. Data privacy ensures that proper use of personal data by giving individuals control over their data, ensures the proper use. It establishes what information is protected, be it financial information, medical records, social security numbers, etc. Data privacy also establishes who has access to the data. Data security is the concept, including the policies and procedures that keeps it safe from theft, corruption, and unauthorized access. And a typical data lifecycle: creation, storage, use, sharing, archive, and destruction. And data is vulnerable to threats, both intentional, right, hackers, as well as unintentional, mistaken deletion of data, or environmental threats. Data protection that provides tools that restrict access to the data, such as encryption, backing up to the cloud, Google Drive, iCloud, password protections, IAM, identity access management, and ID and PS systems and software. Data compliance is the watchdog of data privacy and data protection. It's the process that identifies the applicable governance for data protection, security, storage, and other activities. There's two main types of compliance: corporate, so that's tracking industry standards, internal audits, employee security and awareness training, and regulatory, rules set by law to which organizations must adhere, such as the DPA. The fallout of failure. If the executives know, right, that there's $500 million worth of gold bullion in the company vault, they will ensure that that vault is protected and secure. Do the executives understand the data's worth? If they have 500 million petabytes of data, are they protecting that data as much as they're protecting the gold in the vault? You know, are we going to end up seeing a movie sometime in the future like Ocean's 11, where there's a data heist, right? Because data, like you said earlier, data is the new oil. Data is the new, you know, currency out there, and it has so much value to it. The fallout of failure: lost revenue. Poor data management impacts your company's bottom line, right? So that's why data has to be managed and protected. It must become a priority. There's three reasons: reputation, revenue, and operational efficiency, right? And this talks to the C-suite when you start talking about revenue, right? Dollars. Reputational damage, you know, data breaches and mishandling stick with your company long after the problem is resolved. I still have issues dealing with Equifax, and God knows how long that breach was because of that, because it's real tough to understand, you know, how an organization, you know, had a breach of that magnitude, and has there been any information to show that it won't happen again? Operational inefficiency, right? Poorly managed data is extremely inefficient. It racks up costs and man hours, software and hardware, right? And what we have is a term called dark data. Information, so that dark data, like just unknown data, right? Information that organizations collect, process, and store during regular business activities, but they generally fail to use for other purposes. Storing and securing that data often incurs more expense and greater risk than its value justifies. There's a lot of compliances that have come through the years, and I've been at some organizations where, as a strategy around dark data, they delete anything that they just don't need. They don't keep it. They don't keep any records because, and for my legal friends out there, because if we don't have it and we have policies in place that say we don't have it, then it won't be subject to discovery or a lawsuit, or in the case of IT and cybersecurity, a breach, right? If we don't have that kind of data that could be breached because our policies is deleted as soon as we don't need it anymore, then it won't be subject to a breach. Understanding where data goes. What is the cloud? The cloud technology allows us to access stored data via the internet. The volume of data that companies gather now would be formidable to store in-house. So a lot of times people think the cloud, they say, what does that mean? Does it go to heaven? Is it, you know, a lot of times what I explain to people what the cloud is, it's just a data center somewhere else. And even that is probably not a good explanation anymore with edge and stuff like that we're going to get into. The pros of the cloud are flexibility, scalability, mobility, pay as you go, right? So eliminates hardware expenses, backups, and archiving, right? So these are all the pluses that have made it where so much data has moved into the cloud. But the cons of the cloud is moving your data doesn't guarantee an outcome. You are buying infrastructure or renting infrastructure, right? But the management and protection still falls on the organization. So these are multi-cloud environments. You've got public clouds, private clouds, hybrid clouds, edge clouds, right? Subscription services, private clouds is controlled by the single, hybrid, et cetera. So managing a multi-cloud, so one thing that you definitely have to know is how many clouds your company has its data in. Ensure that the company is not overpaying for the cloud services and for the ability to communicate between these services. Streamline the cloud interactivity and eliminating unnecessary expenses. Now, how do we empower the IT department? Now, I'm not suggesting that CEOs themselves go into the weeds, but the executives, CEOs, and board of directors, the executives should remember the 3 V's of data: volume, velocity, variety. Volume, the amount of data created by your company; velocity, the rate at which your company creates that data; variety, the number of formats that data comes in. As all these 3 V's just continue to expand, inevitably, right, and the sprawl of technologies, new technologies that are coming out, the inevitability of vulnerabilities, right, is going to come into play. So really, when you talk about compliances, you talk about fines, you talk about reputational risk, these are the things that you can communicate with C-suite and board of directors to kind of be proactive, even if you're not bound to a compliance, right? Or specifically you have to because you're going to get a fine because of a regulation or something like that, just for common, cybersecurity hygiene. Thank you, guys.